Hey guys! Today we're looking at a really intense South African crime case. And before we start, I just have to warn you that we talk about really gruesome, disturbing things in this video. So please keep that in mind as we go along. And let's get started. Moses Sithole is South Africa's very own Ted Bundy. He is a serial killer and rapist nicknamed the ABC Killer because he first started killing people in Attridgeville, which starts with an A, then Boksburg, which starts with a B, and then Cleveland, all in Johannesburg. So he was nicknamed the ABC Killer. And today we're going to cover his life, his crimes, his mode of operation, his capture, and his trial. Moses Sithole was born in 1964, making him 57 years old today. He lived in a township near Boksburg, and he was described as a bright and curious boy. But when he was just 5 years old, his father died, and because his father was the sole provider of their family, his mother couldn't afford to take care of him and his siblings, so she dropped them off at a police station and abandoned them there. The police took the kids to an orphanage, which is where Moses Sithole lived until he was 8 years old, and he said that he was very mistreated. He said the treatment was bad, really bad. He had to be strong to survive. So at 8 years old, he ran away to go look for his mother, and when he found her, she told him to go back to the orphanage. And he lived at the orphanage until he was a teenager, where he moved in with his brother. And when he was a teenager, he was accused of rape, and he was imprisoned for 7 years. Moses was described as mild-mannered, and he actually managed a charity called Youth Against Human Abuse, and the mission of this charity was to reunite orphans with their families, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later. After he came out of prison in 1993, he moved in with his girlfriend Martha, who was the sister of one of his fellow inmates, much to her parents' disappointment because they didn't want her to be dating someone who went to prison for rape. But she moved in with him and they had a child together. So he was married with a wife and a child at the time that he was committing these murders, and they didn't even know. Moses targeted women between the ages of 18 and 45 years old. He would dress up in a fancy suit and carry a newspaper on his arm to appear very wealthy, and he would target unemployed women and offer them a high-paying job. Then he would sometimes take them out, he would charm them, gain their trust, and lure them away from people in fields. So once he would isolate them, he would pull out a knife and make them remove their clothes, and he would rape them and then strangle them with articles of their own clothing, like their bras and their panties and their stockings, and then he would dump their bodies randomly in fields.
How long does it take for somebody to die if you strangle them?
Few minutes.
Is it?
Yeah, no, 5 minutes is too much.
Eventually he began to use his organization that I mentioned, Youth Against Human Abuse, to lure women and to get job applications from women and make them trust him. He seemed like a good guy because he had a charity, and he used that charity to reach out to more unemployed women. Moses murdered 37 women and one child in 1994 and 1995 and committed over 40 rapes. One of his first victims was 32-year-old Joyce Mashabela, and she was the sister of one of his girlfriends at the time. He lured her away, he raped her, and then he strangled her with her own stockings until she was unconscious. And when she woke up, he told her that he would kill her if she went to the police about the rape. But she eventually did report it, and he was arrested, and that led to him being imprisoned for that 7 years when he was a teenager. And he believed that she had falsely accused him.
On the way to the Cleveland police station, he then said to her, "Bitch, I should have killed you."
On another one of his victims, one that he actually murdered, he wrote on her leg with black pen, "I am not fighting with you. We will stay here until you understand that." Just written on her leg in black pen. I really don't like this part. In a few instances, he would take the strap of his victim's handbag and put it around her neck and then tie it to a low tree branch so that she could barely stand. And eventually after a few hours, he would watch as she would get too tired to stand and, release herself, let herself down, and end up strangling herself. And he would watch for the 2 hours that it would take for her to be unable to continue to stand and kill herself, strangle herself. He would sometimes then phone the family members of the victims and say things like, "It serves you well, you are now walking over the grave of Monica." Monica was one of his victims who passed away. At one point, President Nelson Mandela visited Boksburg in person to plead with the public to help find the serial killer and stop more innocent women from dying. In another instance, he ended up inflicting a head wound on the 2-year-old child of one of his victims, and he left the boy there to die from exposure. In September 1995, some men were in a field and discovered 10 bodies of women at various degrees of decomposition. It first started that the police would find a body every 2 weeks, and then a body every week, and then 2 bodies a week.
The police would go and remove the body, process the crime scene, and 2 days later you'd have a body at the same spot. That's very arrogant.
Another heartbreaking story was that of Trifina Mokgotsi. She worked in an orphanage, and Moses actually found her through his organization, Youth Against Human Abuse. And at the time, she was living with her 3 siblings and her mother, and they were struggling financially. So he offered her a high-paying job, and she was very excited because she thought, I can finally support my entire family. And her co-workers were actually jealous because she was going to get this new high-paying job with this man, and he charmed her and gained her trust. And you can see how he looks for the most vulnerable people and preys on them. She really needed a high-paying job and she wanted to trust him. But this led to his capture because luckily her co-workers remembered his name and his face, and so finally the police had a proper suspect. At one point, Moses phoned the police and gave them an anonymous tip that his brother-in-law was the murderer, and the police brought his brother-in-law in and interrogated him. And when they were done and his brother came home, he asked his brother to tell him exactly what questions they asked, how much they knew, so that he could find out about this investigation and just stay one step ahead of him. He phoned a reporter for the Johannesburg Star, Tamsin de Beer, from phone booths 3 times, and he told her that his name was Joseph and that he was the murderer, and their conversations were lengthy, and she described him as very well-spoken and very charming. He told us that the purpose of the murders were to bring attention to the injustice that he faced by being falsely accused of rape when he was a teenager and going to prison because of it. And he told her very vivid descriptions of the murders that he committed, and to prove that he was the murderer, he instructed her as to where the location was of one of the bodies that the police had not yet discovered.
She described how some women would fight, other women would just give up. It was of some interest to him, I think, how certain women would respond and others would fight. I remember him saying that some women were as strong as men.
On his 3rd call to Tamsin de Beer, he was running out of money in his phone booth, and so she asked him for the number of the phone booth so that she could call him back. And so she phoned him back and kept him distracted on the phone so that the police could go and get him because they located him from the number of the phone booth. But somehow he figured out what was going on and he was able to get away. He just ran away, and a few days later he phoned Tamsin again and he was very angry at her. He told her, "How could you do that, and I trusted you." He was very angry at her. In August 1995, Moses asked his brother-in-law to help him get a gun. So his brother-in-law agreed, and they set up a meeting to exchange the gun, but his brother-in-law agreed to the meeting and then phoned the police and told them. So the police set up a little undercover operation to arrest Moses when he attended this meetup. And when Moses got there, he kind of somehow sensed that it was a trap and he began to run away again. This time though, an officer ran after him, and as they're running through a dark alley, Moses turns around and swings an axe at the officer, but luckily he missed. However, in response, the officer shot him in the abdomen and the leg, and he was rushed to hospital where he recovered just fine. But he refused to be interrogated by a male officer. Whenever the male officer would ask him questions, he would just say, "Oh, I don't know. I wasn't with you. I don't know what's going on." So they got a female detective to interrogate him. He masturbated while he was describing the murders to this female detective. Not only was he aroused by what he'd done, he was aroused by telling a female officer what he had done. Moses' trial began in October of 1996, where there were 140 witnesses, and Moses actually intimidated the witnesses while they were on the stand.
When I was giving my story, and then he was just laughing at me, and he was shaking his head.
There were a lot of women protesting at his trial. In this clip, they're singing, "Why are you killing us, Sithole?" On the 5th of December 1997, Sithole was sentenced to 50 years imprisonment for each of the 38 murders, 12 years imprisonment for each of the 40 rapes, which brings his total to 2,410 years. And the judge told Sithole that had capital punishment not been abolished, he would have been sentenced to death. He is currently incarcerated in a correctional center at Bloemfontein. The police knew of more rapes, but there wasn't sufficient evidence to charge him on every single one. And in prison, they discovered that he was HIV positive, but because he was in prison, he received the medication that he needed. However, he had infected his wife, Martha, and his child, who were too poor to afford the antiretroviral drugs that they needed. So, why did he do this? Well, he said that his mother was an alcoholic and was abusive, and she abandoned him and sent him to live in an orphanage where he said that they were mistreated. And he felt that the accusation of rape that led him to be imprisoned for 7 years was false. And in prison, he was sexually abused and rejected for being a rapist. So he blames that first victim for the abuse that he went through in prison because he felt that she had falsely accused him. The women he murdered all reminded him of that first woman who he felt falsely accused him of rape years before. He felt that he had been betrayed by women all his life, first his mother and then the sister of his girlfriend. When he was asked why he raped and killed women, he said it was to teach them a lesson. And experts think that the abuse that he underwent when he was a child gave him a warped perspective of women, and that he never felt in control his whole life, so these killings were a way for him to gain power back.
If he's right in on the spot, and then the decision, the final decision, that here, she must die.
So this was a very disturbing case, but there's actually quite a bit more to it. I just summarized it in this video. If you want to learn more about it, Mfundo and Dala actually did a really great in-depth video about it, which I will link for you guys if you want to go watch that. What scared me a lot was that one of his victims knew karate, and he said that she was as strong as a man and that he struggled to fight with her to win for a very long time. And it just scares me that you can be a strong woman and you can know karate, but at the end of the day, Moses could still kill you. So, do you guys think that these killings were justified because of the abuse that he went through when he was a child at the hands of his mother, at the hands of his orphanage? And do you think that he was falsely accused? Let me know in the comments. But until my next video, thank you guys so much for watching, and please stay safe. I'll see you next time.